So today we're going to take a trip down memory lane as we're going to be looking back in the 2019 NHL trade deadline, where Mark Stone was the big fish on the market. And there were a couple of teams that were interested in Mark Stone, one of them being the New York Islanders. What was the trade looking like? And unfortunately, things fell through because we know how the story went. It was pretty much he got traded to the Las Vegas Golden Knights and he signed an extension. But the Islanders had an offer on the table, and we'll be taking a look at that in this video. If you like what we're doing here at Goal Line Hockey, if you want to see the latest news around the NHL, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and a subscribe down below. And let's take a look at the possibility that the Islanders almost acquired Mark Stone. So February 2019, there was a lot of hype throughout most of the season that Mark Stone would inevitably get traded by the Ottawa Senators. He had no intention of signing really with the Ottawa Senators. There was talk here and there. Maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't. But the Ottawa Senators didn't want to take any chances past the trade deadline. They knew they needed some draft picks. They couldn't let him go for nothing in June. So they decided that they were going to move him at the trade deadline. So rumors all over pretty much since January of that year, for probably about two and a half months, there was talk about Mark Stone getting traded. And one of those teams that now with new general manager Lou Lamoriello and a resurgence and a really solid season, the New York Islanders were in on trying to bring in another elite top six forward into the organization. He fits the Lou Lamoriello mold. He plays a very solid two-way game. And not to mention, he can score a decent amount of goals. And obviously, he is one of the best two-way forwards in the NHL right now. So it's pretty, it makes sense why the New York Islanders would want to pick this player up. He would fit well under Barry Trotz. This is a great fit, possibly for the New York Islanders. So we're going to take a look at the deal that was potentially on the table. Now, this is what ended up happening. We saw Erik Brannstrom, Oscar Lindberg, and a 2020 second-round pick that was actually the Dallas Stars' second-round pick go to the Ottawa Senators in exchange for Mark Stone and Tobias Lindberg. So the Lindbergs pretty much traded places. But all kidding aside, yeah, this is a interesting trade because Erik Brannstrom is projected to be a top four defenseman at the NHL level. And obviously the Ottawa Senators, they weren't totally sure what was going on with their defense at the time. You had Thomas Chabot, who looked like a very promising player. But besides that, it was a couple of guys that we didn't really know too much about. Obviously, since then, now looking, you have Thomas Chabot, who is a very solid defenseman, Josh Shear, and Erik Brannstrom, who now is in that mold. This is a couple of good players that the Ottawa Senators were able to add, not to mention the second-round pick and the, pretty much to fill the role of Mark Stone through the end of that 2019 season. Oscar Lindberg was able to fill that through the rest of that season. Now, what was the trade that was rumored and talked about between the New York Islanders and the Ottawa Senators? So basically, if you look at the pieces involved, it's similar pieces and similar value, just obviously different players. So looking at what I think the New York Islanders could have done with the Ottawa Senators. This isn't perfectly what was rumored, but it's pretty much what the main pieces that we would have likely seen. It's obviously the New York Islanders acquire Mark Stone. In exchange, the Ottawa Senators would have been picking up Anthony Beauvillier, Michael Dalcol, and the New York Islanders 2020 second-round pick. Now, why did this trade fall through? Well, the big thing that, there's a couple of things, but I think the big thing came down to the Ottawa Senators were looking to bring in the defenseman, and they felt that Erik Brannstrom was more valuable than Anthony Beauvillier. Now, you could argue pretty easily that's the case. Obviously, Erik Brannstrom's a little bit younger than Anthony Beauvillier, and Anthony Beauvillier really hasn't shown signs of being a star power, that really elite skill. And there is still that potential in a guy like Erik Brannstrom. And I think the Ottawa Senators were more attracted to what Erik Brannstrom had to offer than a guy like Anthony Beauvillier. But Michael Dalcol would also be interesting as well because Michael Dalcol could be a kind of, power forward-esque player in the Ottawa Senators organization. He is a former 5th overall pick back in the day, I believe 2015. So he has that potential still there. Maybe he won't be that kind of player, but Anthony Beauvillier could possibly be a good top 6 player. He's a little bit closer to home. He's from Quebec in that area. Obviously, a last name like Beauvillier obviously fits that. So he'd be a little bit closer to home as well, which would have made that trade interesting. And obviously, the second round pick, which the Ottawa Senators got from the Vegas Golden Knights anyway. So isn't it interesting to think? I mean, you look at the Islanders' top 6 right now, and they still have that same issue. They tried to get Artemi Panarin last year on July 1st in free agency. That didn't work out. And before that, it was Mark Stone. And there was there was a lot of talk that the Islanders were pretty close to a deal. Lou Lamoriello and Pierre Dorion were fairly close on a deal for Mark Stone to come to the New York Islanders. But at the end of the day, the Ottawa Senators wanted to bring in a guy like Erik Brannstrom, and they felt like that would be a more valuable piece to them than a middle 6 forward guy, a late first-round pick in Anthony Beauvillier. So what would the Islanders' top 6 look like with Mark Stone in there? It looks pretty solid. You pretty much replace Anthony Beauvillier with Mark Stone. Looking at that top line, you would have Anders Lee, Matt Barzal, and the newly acquired Mark Stone. That is a very solid first line. And Anders Lee can get in front of the net. Mark Stone and Barzal kind of leading things along the sides, kind of keeping the play going, making passes, kind of creating space for each other. That would be a very dynamic first line. And obviously Mark Stone has that unbelievable shot, and they would probably be feeding him the puck a decent amount of the time, more often than not. Now looking at that second line, you have Josh Bailey, Brock Nelson, and Jordan Eberle, who is currently listed as the Islanders on the first line on that right side where Mark Stone would have been. So now Jordan Eberle slides down to the second line on the right side with Bailey and Brock Nelson. Currently, without Mark Stone in this fold, they actually have Andrew Ladd in the top 6, because in the bottom 6 you've got obviously this is what would be right now, because obviously Pajot got traded to the Islanders. You have Derek Brassard, Komarov, Clutterbuck, Martin, and Andrew Ladd in the bottom 6, as well as a guy like Tom Kuhnhackl, who we probably aren't going to see in a New York Islanders jersey. That's probably it from what we saw, unless he plays in the play-in series. I don't know. But he will probably be leaving the New York Islanders this offseason, more than likely, I would think. And the Islanders have plenty of young guys that are going to come up in that top 6 as well. I mean, you look at guys like Oliver Wahlstrom, Kiefer Bellows. There's a lot of potential that those guys could be dressing for the New York Islanders in the starting lineup in January for this upcoming season. So there's a lot of excitement for the New York Islanders. Obviously, having Mark Stone in that top 6 would have been a game changer. And considering what the Vegas Golden Knights really gave up for Mark Stone, it's really not that bad of a price. They didn't have to give up a first-round pick, and they gave up a guy in Erik Brannstrom, which may come back to bite them in a couple of years. But overall, the Vegas Golden Knights look at themselves as a win-now mode team right now. You've got Marc-Andre Fleury. You've signed all these guys like William Karlsson and Jonathan Marchessault. You've got all of those guys lined up there. So, yeah, they've taken a couple of hits on the blue line, but maybe it was worth it. And you know what? They got to the Stanley Cup Finals in year number 1. So there was obviously the feeling that if they got Mark Stone, that could be what puts them over the edge to possibly getting into a Stanley Cup contender status, which they obviously were at the time. They got bounced in the first round by the San Jose Sharks. But still, it's definitely interesting to think, what if this trade ended up happening where the Islanders, that was more interesting to Pierre Dorion. How would that look for the Ottawa Senators? The Vegas Golden Knights wouldn't have Mark Stone. That definitely would have been interesting to see how things would have worked out. Would the Vegas Golden Knights have went out and acquired another player if they missed on Mark Stone? It's definitely something that we're never going to know all the answers to, but it definitely would be interesting looking back now. So that's it for this video. If you like what we're doing here at Goal Line Hockey, you want to see the latest news around the NHL, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and a subscribe down below. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.